Most mothers bake cookies or send passive-aggressive texts when they miss their kids. Mine, she orchestrated a corporate sabotage campaign to destroy my career, betting an eviction notice would force me back into my childhood bedroom. She didn't account for my CEO or the police. You don't just leave a house like my mother's, you escape it. There was no explosive final argument, no shattered plates or screaming matches on the front lawn. My mother, Margaret, didn't operate in the realm of loud, messy emotions. She was an architect of quiet, suffocating guilt. Her weapon of choice was a heavy, disappointed sigh that could curdle milk from 3 rooms away. For 23 years, I lived under the suffocating blanket of her concern. I was too frail, too naive, too disorganized to survive without her. Or so she told me, daily, framing her control as maternal devotion. When I finally packed my Honda Civic to the roof and drove 300 miles to Chicago, I felt like I was breaking the atmosphere. The gravity pulling me back was immense. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat the entire drive. Did you check your tire pressure? People die on that interstate, Chloe. I left a first aid kit in your trunk. Don't use the bandages on the left. They're expired. Call me when you pass the state line. If you don't, I'll assume you're in a ditch. I didn't answer. I just drove. My new life was nothing glamorous. My apartment was a 4th-floor walk-up that smelled permanently of boiled cabbage and old dust. The radiators clanked like a dying engine, and the window in the kitchen looked out onto a brick wall. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. I landed a job at Ironwood Logistics, a mid-sized supply chain management firm downtown. It wasn't the kind of place they make movies about. The carpets were a depressing shade of industrial gray, the coffee tasted like burnt copper, and the air conditioning had exactly 2 settings, Arctic blast and stagnant swamp. But it was mine. I was an account manager. My job was to keep trucking companies, warehouses, and demanding corporate clients from ripping each other's throats out over delayed shipments. I was good at it. Turns out, 2 decades of placating an unpredictable, demanding mother translates perfectly into de-escalating angry warehouse managers. For the first 6 months, I thrived. I paid my own rent. I bought my own groceries. I made friends with the IT guy, a perpetually exhausted 20-something named Toby, and my direct supervisor, David, a man whose entire personality was built around his collection of novelty ties and an underlying fear of conflict. And then there was the phone. Margaret called every evening at exactly 7 p.m. If I didn't answer, she called at 7:05, then 7:15. Then came the texts. I guess you're too busy for the woman who gave you life. Saw on the news there was a mugging in Chicago. Please tell me you aren't dead. Your father's gout is flaring up. He asked about you. I didn't know what to say. My father passed away when I was 12. She only brought him up when she needed heavy artillery. When I did answer, the conversations were a masterclass in psychological warfare. She never asked how my day was. She asked leading questions designed to highlight my supposed incompetence. Are you eating vegetables? You sounded raspy the other day. Scurvy is making a comeback, Chloe. I'm eating fine, Mom. Work is just busy. Busy. Right. Well, don't let them work you to the bone. You never did handle stress well. Remember when you cried during your 8th grade science fair? I always said you weren't built for the corporate grind. Your old bedroom is exactly how you left it, just in case. I'm not coming back, Mom. Silence. Then the sigh. I'm just being a mother. Excuse me for caring. I thought it was just standard empty nest syndrome. I thought she would eventually adjust, find a hobby, maybe join a book club where she could critique fictional characters instead of her daughter. I was an idiot. My mother didn't need a hobby. Her hobby was me. And when she realized I wasn't going to fail on my own, she decided to help me along. It started small. So small, you could easily mistake it for the normal friction of corporate life. It was a Tuesday in early October. The Chicago wind was already starting to bite, and I was buried under a pile of invoices from a particularly difficult vendor in Ohio. David walked over to my cubicle, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He was wearing a tie with tiny cartoon golf clubs on it. That meant he was uncomfortable. Hey, Chloe, got a second? I spun my chair around. Sure. Is this about the Peterson shipment? Because I swear, The driver gave me the wrong ETA. No, it's not the freight, David said, avoiding my eyes. He scratched the back of his neck. HR got a weird message through the public feedback portal on our website. About you. My stomach performed a slow, unpleasant roll. About me? From a client? The name was left blank. It just said, well, it said you were aggressively rude on the phone and that you sounded intoxicated during a morning call. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. David, I don't drink. You know I don't drink. I get a migraine if I even look at a glass of red wine, and I haven't had a single escalated client call in 3 weeks. I know, he said quickly, raising his hands in surrender. Look, it's probably just a spam bot or some driver who got mad about a late fee and decided to be petty. I have to officially inform you because of HR policy, but don't sweat it. Just keep doing what you're doing. I nodded, but the cold feeling in my gut didn't go away. I checked my call logs, nothing out of the ordinary. I shrugged it off as a fluke. 2 weeks later, the front desk receptionist, a sweet older woman named Barbara, buzzed my line. Chloe, I have a woman on line 3. She says she's your landlord. She sounds incredibly upset. Panic spiked in my chest. Did my rent check bounce? Did I leave the stove on and burn the building down? Put her through, Barb. There was a click. Hello? I said. The line went dead, just the flat drone of a dial tone. I immediately called my actual landlord, a gruff guy named Sal who only communicated in grunts and demands for cash. Sal, it's Chloe from 4B. Did you just call my office? What? No. Why would I call your office? Rent's paid. Don't bother me, he grunted, hanging up. I sat at my desk, the plastic receiver still pressed to my ear, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. Someone had called my job pretending to be my landlord. Why? To check if I still worked there? To make me look chaotic to the receptionist? When I told David, he looked genuinely concerned. Do you have a stalker, Chloe? An angry ex-boyfriend? I don't have an ex-boyfriend, I said, my voice tight. I barely have a social life. The paranoia crept in like a slow-moving fog. I started jumping every time the phone rang. I triple-checked every email before sending it. I stopped eating my sad desk salads in the break room, opting to eat in my car instead, watching the office doors. Then came the emails to HR. This time, they weren't anonymous. They were from concerned clients. One from a Sarah Jenkins, another from a Michael Vance. They claimed I was unresponsive, that I had cursed at them, that I was losing their paperwork. HR pulled me into a sterile, glass-walled conference room. The HR director, a woman with a sharp bob and a permanent scowl, slid printed copies of the emails across the table. Chloe, we value your work here, but this is a pattern, she said, tapping her manicured nail against the paper. 3 complaints in a month. I read the emails. The grammar was impeccable. The formatting was strange double spaces after every period. An antiquated typing habit. Chloe was incredibly dismissive regarding our account. I fear she is under immense personal strain and is unfit to manage our logistics. I have no idea who these people are, I said, my voice shaking. We don't have a Sarah Jenkins or a Michael Vance in our database. I checked. They could be aliases for subcontractors, the HR director countered. Chloe, we need to know if there's something going on at home that's affecting your performance. Ironwood has an employee assistance program if you need help. She thought I was having a mental breakdown. I was starting to think she was right. I went home that night and collapsed onto my cheap sofa. I stared at the ceiling, tracing the water stains with my eyes. My phone buzzed. 7 p.m. Margaret. I almost didn't answer, but a twisted, desperate part of me needed to hear a familiar voice, even hers. Hello? I croaked. You sound awful, she said immediately. Not a question. A diagnosis. Are you sick? I told you that city air is toxic. I'm just tired, Mom. Work is stressful right now. There was a pause, a thick, heavy silence. And then the tone of her voice shifted. It dropped an octave. It became sickeningly soothing. The voice a predator uses to coax a frightened animal out of a hole. I knew it, she whispered. I knew this would happen. You push yourself too hard, Chloe. You aren't built for that cutthroat environment. It's breaking you down. I'm fine, I snapped, sitting up. You're not fine. You sound on the verge of a collapse. There is no shame in admitting you made a mistake. Your room is here. I dusted it today. You can just pack up, break your lease. I'll even help you pay the fee and come home. You can work part-time at the bakery in town. Simple work. Less stress. I froze. You push yourself too hard. Under immense personnel strain, the phrasing, the double spaces after the periods in those emails, the sheer terrifying audacity. Mom, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Did you call my office today? What? Don't be ridiculous, she said too quickly. A defensive snap. Why would I call your office? Did you email my HR department? Chloe, you are sounding paranoid. Listen to yourself. This is exactly what I'm talking about. The stress is making you delusional. You need to come home. I hung up. I threw the phone across the room. It bounced off the ugly floral armchair and hit the floor. I didn't have proof. I had a gut feeling, a mother's archaic typing habits, and a lifetime of knowing exactly how far Margaret would go to maintain control. She wanted me home. And she realized that if I couldn't afford to live in Chicago, I wouldn't have a choice. She wasn't just predicting my failure, she was actively engineering it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker, realizing that the monster wasn't under the bed. She had a cell phone and a Wi-Fi connection. If my mother had stopped at the petty complaints, she might have won. HR was already building a file. David was looking at me with pity instead of respect. The creeping anxiety was making me careless. I missed a real deadline because I was too busy auditing my own emails to make sure I hadn't actually yelled at a vendor in a fugue state. But Margaret lacked a fundamental understanding of the corporate world. She thought HR was the final boss. She didn't realize that in a company like Ironwood, HR handles personnel issues, but the C-suite handles the money. And you do not mess with the money. Arthur Pendleton was the CEO of Ironwood Logistics. He was a man carved out of flint and black coffee. He rarely descended to our floor, preferring his glass-walled office on the top floor where he could glare at the Chicago skyline. He didn't know my name. To him, I was a line item on a payroll spreadsheet. Until the third week of November, I was at my desk, aggressively chewing on the inside of my cheek, trying to untangle a routing error in Cincinnati. The phone rang. It wasn't the external line. It was the internal executive extension. I picked it up, Chloe speaking. My office. 5 minutes. The voice was gravelly. Clipped. Click. I didn't look at David. I didn't grab my notepad. I just stood up, my legs feeling like lead pipes, and walked to the elevator. This was it. She had finally done it. The final blow. I was going to be fired. I wondered how long I could stretch my savings. Maybe I could sleep in my Honda. Anything but the bedroom with the floral wallpaper. When I stepped into Arthur Pendleton's office, it was freezing. The man liked to keep the ambient temperature somewhere around a meat locker. He was sitting behind a massive oak desk, staring intently at his monitor. He didn't look up when I entered. "Shut the door," he ordered. I clicked it shut. I stood rigidly in front of his desk. "Mr. Pendleton?" He finally looked up. His eyes were pale blue and completely devoid of warmth. He reached out and spun a printed document across the polished wood of his desk. "Read that," he said. I picked it up. My hands were shaking so badly, the paper rattled. It was an email sent directly to his private executive address. A severe, formal complaint. Dear Mr. Pendleton, it is with grave concern that I bring a matter of gross negligence and financial misconduct to your attention. It has come to my knowledge, as a deeply entrenched partner in the logistics community, that your account manager, Chloe, has been manipulating freight rates and skimming from vendor payouts to fund a severe and escalating substance abuse problem. I urge you to audit her accounts immediately before the authorities are involved. A concerned vendor. I stopped breathing. The blood roared in my ears. This wasn't just a petty HR complaint about being rude. This was an accusation of a federal crime. Embezzlement. Fraud. Mr. Pendleton, I gasped, the words tumbling out in a panic. This is a lie. I swear to you, I don't even know how to manipulate the freight rates. The system is locked down by IT. I don't use drugs. You can drug test me right now. Cut my hair, take my blood. I don't care. This is insane. He watched me. He didn't blink. The silence stretched so long I felt like I was going to pass out. Then he leaned back in his leather chair and steepled his fingers. I know, he said. I blinked. You. No? I know you aren't skimming freight rates, he said dryly, because our accounting software is practically draconian. If you manage to siphon money out of this company with your security clearance, I wouldn't fire you. I'd promote you to Chief Financial Officer. I also know you don't have a drug problem because people with severe substance abuse issues rarely have a perfect attendance record and a meticulously organized desk. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Then, why am I here? Arthur Pendleton leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. Because someone is trying very, very hard to make me fire you. And I do not like being manipulated. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Toby, get in here. Less than a minute later, the IT guy, Toby, scurried into the office. He looked terrified. He was clutching a tablet to his chest like a shield. Tell her, Arthur commanded. Toby swallowed hard, looking between me and the CEO. Well, Mr. Pendleton asked me to trace the IP address of that email and the one sent to HR over the last month. And? I asked, my voice trembling. Well, whoever sent them was using a free VPN service to try and mask their location, bouncing the signal around, but they were using the free version which drops the connection randomly. I found a gap in the logs. The true IP address leaked. Toby tapped his tablet. It's a residential IP, registered to a suburban address in, well, your hometown, Chloe. The ISP account is registered to a Margaret. The room spun. Hearing it confirmed out loud was entirely different from suspecting it. My own mother, the woman who packed me a first aid kit, the woman who claimed to love me more than life itself. She had manufactured a federal crime just to break me. I couldn't form a sentence. The betrayal tasted like ash in my mouth. Arthur Pendleton watched me process the information. His expression softened, just a fraction. Not pity, recognition. Corporate espionage is one thing, Arthur said, his voice dangerously quiet. A competitor trying to poach clients. A disgruntled ex-employee. I deal with those on a Tuesday. But this, he gestured to the paper. This is interference with my business operations. This is defamation of my employee. This is costing my company time, resources, and sanity. I am so sorry, I whispered. I will resign. I'll pack my desk. I won't let her cause any more trouble for Ironwood. Sit down, Arthur barked. I jumped, dropping into the chair opposite his desk. Did I ask for your resignation? He asked. No, sir. Then keep it to yourself. You don't retreat when someone attacks your livelihood. You neutralize the threat. He looked at Toby. You have the digital trail secured? Yes, sir. All logs, IP addresses, time-stamped. Arthur turned his gaze back to me. It was sharp, predatory, and entirely focused. Chloe, does your mother have any money? I blinked, thrown off by the question. Yes. My father left a substantial life insurance policy, and the house is fully paid off. Why? Arthur Pendleton smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark that just smelled blood in the water. Because, he said softly, she has just committed tortious interference, defamation, and attempted wire fraud against my company, and I am going to sue her into the bedrock. Arthur Pendleton didn't make empty threats. He didn't operate on emotion, vengeance, or spite. He operated on a terrifying mechanical efficiency. Within 48 hours of our meeting, the machinery of Ironwood Logistics' legal department locked on to my mother. I was introduced to Diane. Diane was the head of corporate litigation. She was a woman in her late 50s who wore immaculate charcoal suits and possessed the interpersonal warmth of a surgical scalpel. She didn't offer me a tissue or a sympathetic tilt of the head. She offered me a yellow legal pad and a pen. I need dates, times, and every documented communication you have with Margaret over the last 6 months, Diane said, sitting across from me in a conference room that smelled of lemon polish and ozone. I don't care about the emotional abuse. The court doesn't care if she was a bad mother. We care about the quantifiable damages she attempted to inflict on this company. We are building a tortious interference claim. I handed over my phone. Toby, the IT guy, extracted the voicemails, the texts, the call logs. They cross-referenced her communication spikes with the anonymous complaints sent to HR. It was a perfect, damning overlay. Every time I told her I was doing well, a new complaint was filed from a fake vendor. Every time I refused to move home, she escalated her tactics. The hardest part wasn't handing over the evidence. The hardest part was the waiting. For 23 years, my nervous system had been wired to anticipate my mother's anger. I lived in a perpetual state of flinching. Now, knowing a corporate lawsuit was barreling toward her suburban front door, I couldn't sleep. I felt a twisted, sickening sense of guilt. "She's your mother," the small, conditioned voice in my head whispered. "You're letting strangers destroy her." I almost cracked on a Sunday. I had my thumb hovering over her contact name in my phone. I wanted to call her, to tell her to stop, to apologize to Arthur, to just admit what she did before the lawyers ruined her. I stared at the screen. Then I opened my bank app. I looked at the balance. My rent was paid. My electricity was on. I bought my own groceries. I was a functioning, independent adult. And she had tried to burn my life to the ground just to keep me as a pet. I locked my phone and put it in the drawer. The process server reached her house at 4:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. I know this because my phone began to vibrate at exactly 4:18 p.m. I was at my desk, drafting an email to a dispatcher in Milwaukee. The phone buzzed and buzzed and buzzed. I let it go to voicemail. By 5 p.m., I had 14 missed calls. By 6 p.m., my voicemail inbox was entirely full. I sat in my Honda in the parking garage, the engine off, the air freezing, and listened to them in chronological order. The first voicemail was pure, unadulterated outrage. "Chloe, pick up the phone. A man just came to my door, in front of the neighbors. He handed me a stack of papers from some law firm in Chicago. They are claiming I sent emails to your boss. This is a sick joke. You call these people off right now. You tell them they have made a massive mistake." The fourth voicemail, 20 minutes later. The anger was fracturing. Panic was bleeding through the cracks. "Chloe, I just read the sum they are asking for. Are you out of your mind? Are you doing drugs? They are accusing me of fraud. Federal wire fraud, Chloe. I am calling my lawyer. You are going to look incredibly foolish when I take this to court. Answer your damn phone." The ninth voicemail. The realization. They have my IP address. How do they have my IP address? Did you let them hack my computer? "Chloe, please. Please pick up. I was just trying to help you. You were so stressed. You sounded so tired. I just wanted you to come home where it's safe. Why are you doing this to me?" The final voicemail was just sobbing. Wet, gasping, breathless sobbing. The kind of crying she used to deploy when I told her I wanted to go to a friend's house instead of staying in to watch movies with her. It was designed to trigger my deepest maternal protection instincts. I listened to the sobbing for 30 seconds. I felt my chest tighten, my throat ached. I wanted to throw up. But underneath the nausea, buried deep beneath 2 decades of engineered subservience, I felt something else. Silence. the terrifying, beautiful silence of a cut string. She wasn't a god. She wasn't an all-powerful force of nature. She was just a lonely, bitter woman who got caught. The next morning, I walked into Arthur Pendleton's office. He was drinking his black coffee, reading the Wall Street Journal. "She got served," I said. He didn't look up from the paper. "I know." Her local attorney called Diane at 6 in the morning. He sounded like he was having a myocardial infarction. "She thinks I can call it off. She wants me to drop it." Arthur folded the newspaper and placed it on his desk. He looked at me, his pale eyes pinning me in place. "Are you asking me to drop it?" I looked at the oak desk. I looked at the Chicago skyline out the window. The sky was the color of slate, spitting snow onto the concrete below. It was harsh and cold and real. "No," I said, "bury her." The deposition took place 3 weeks later in a glass-paneled boardroom on the 50th floor of a downtown legal high-rise. I didn't have to be there. Diane told me I was under no legal obligation to attend the preliminary meetings, but I needed to see it. I needed to watch the illusion shatter in real time. When I walked into the room, Margaret was already seated. She wore her best navy blue church suit and a string of pearls. Her hair was sprayed into an immovable helmet. She looked like she was preparing to scold a misbehaving bank teller. Next to her sat her lawyer, a balding, deeply perspiring man named Greg, who normally handled local real estate closings and minor DUIs in my hometown. He looked like he had been strapped into a roller coaster he didn't want to ride. Across from them sat Diane, flanking Arthur Pendleton. Margaret's eyes snapped to me the moment I opened the door. The mask of maternal sorrow slipped perfectly into place. Her chin quivered. "Chloe," she breathed, reaching a hand across the heavy mahogany table. "Oh, honey, look at you. Look at what these people are doing to us." I didn't take her hand. I pulled out a heavy leather chair next to Diane and sat down. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her. The hand slowly retreated. The quiver stopped. Her eyes narrowed. "Let's begin," Diane said, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. She didn't bother with pleasantries. She opened a thick, black binder. It landed on the table with a heavy, final thud. Diane laid it all out. The logs, the IP addresses, the time-stamped VPN failures, the financial estimates of the hours HR spent investigating the fake claims, the potential loss of revenue due to the defamation of an Ironwood employee. Greg, my mother's lawyer, cleared his throat. He tugged at his collar. "Now listen here. My client is a concerned mother. She was acting out of a misguided sense of familial protection. There was no malicious financial intent. She didn't actually steal anything. To call this corporate espionage is a massive overreach." "Intent is irrelevant to the damage caused," Diane replied smoothly, not looking at Greg. She looked only at Margaret. "Your client willfully transmitted fraudulent documents across state lines to interfere with the commerce and operations of an Illinois corporation. If we pursue the wire fraud angle with the federal prosecutor, Margaret will face criminal charges. We are currently offering a civil settlement to avoid tying up the courts." Margaret scoffed. It was a sharp, ugly sound. "A settlement? I don't have the kind of money you're talking about. This is extortion. I am her mother." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "I raised her. I kept a roof over her head. She was having a mental breakdown in this godforsaken city, and I was trying to bring her home. You are going to sue a mother for loving her daughter?" Arthur Pendleton leaned forward. He had been silent the entire meeting, perfectly still. When he moved, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. "Margaret," Arthur said. His voice was gravel and ice. "You don't love your daughter. You love your control over your daughter. You view her independence as a personal insult." Margaret's face flushed a deep, mottled purple. "How dare you speak to me?" "I dare," Arthur interrupted, his tone barely rising, yet commanding absolute silence. "Because you dragged my company into your pathetic domestic psychodrama. You attempted to manipulate my payroll, my HR department, and my time. You thought because you could bully a child, you could bully a corporation. You were wrong." He slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was the settlement agreement. You will pay the sum listed on that paper, Arthur said. It covers the legal fees, the investigative hours, and punitive damages for defamation. If you sign it, we drop the criminal complaint. If you don't, I will personally ensure the federal authorities dissect every piece of electronics in your home. I will take your house, Margaret. I will take your retirement. I will leave you with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back. Margaret stared at the number on the paper. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking old. Incredibly, devastatingly old. The righteous indignation vanished, replaced by stark, naked terror. She looked at her lawyer. Greg just stared at the table, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. He had nothing. He couldn't fight this. Then she looked at me. This was the moment. This was the exact juncture where, for my entire life, I would have caved. I would have rushed around the table, hugged her, apologized for being so difficult, and promised to make it better. The conditioning screamed at me to fix it, to save her. I looked into my mother's eyes. I saw the desperation. I saw the manipulation, trying to find a foothold. I felt nothing. The well was dry. Sign it, Mom, I said softly. It was the first time I had spoken in the room. Her lips parted. She looked at me as if I were a stranger. A ghost. In a way, she was right. The frightened, compliant little girl she had carefully cultivated was dead. I had buried her somewhere on Interstate 94. Margaret picked up the expensive metal pen Diane had provided. Her hand shook violently. The pen scratched against the paper, a jagged, ugly signature. She dropped the pen. It clattered loudly in the silent room. She didn't look at me again. She stood up, grabbed her purse, and walked out of the glass doors. Her lawyer scrambled to pack his briefcase and scurried out after her, muttering an apology to the room. Diane closed the black binder. Well, that was efficient. Arthur stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked at me. Take the rest of the day off, Chloe. Be at your desk tomorrow at 8 a.m. We have the Peterson freight to unsnarl. Yes, Mr. Pendleton. Thank you. He nodded once, turned, and walked out. I stayed in the boardroom for a few minutes alone. I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city of Chicago sprawled out below me, a chaotic, beautiful grid of concrete, glass, and steel. It was indifferent. It didn't care if I succeeded or failed. It didn't care if I was warm, or if I ate my vegetables, or if I made a mistake. It was the safest I had ever felt. I found out later, through a distant aunt who still talked to me, the fallout of the settlement. Margaret had to liquidate her retirement savings and take out a second mortgage on the house to pay Ironwood Logistics. The financial strain forced her to get a job. She ended up working the front desk at a local dental clinic, a job she considered beneath her, forced to smile at people and take orders from a manager half her age. She never called me again. She changed her phone number. She told the rest of the family that I had joined a corporate cult and was dead to her. I didn't try to correct the narrative. Let them think what they wanted. I had logistics to manage. I left the high-rise and walked out into the freezing November air. The wind whipped down the concrete canyons, biting at my cheeks and tearing through my thin wool coat. I pulled my scarf tighter around my neck. I walked to the nearest coffee shop, bought a bitter, overly roasted black coffee, and took the train back to my fourth-floor walk-up. The radiators were still clanking, the apartment still smelled like dust. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and locked the deadbolt behind me. The silence of the apartment wrapped around me. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of my childhood home, thick with unspoken demands and impending rage. It was a clean silence, an empty canvas. My phone sat on the kitchen counter. The screen was dark, no missed calls, no texts predicting my demise. I took off my coat, sat on the ugly floral sofa, and drank my coffee. I had a vendor meeting at 9 the next morning. I had rent due in 2 weeks. I was entirely, terrifyingly alone. It was glorious. If you've ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member just to survive, drop a comment below. I want to hear your story. You are not alone in this. Hit that like button if you think Arthur Pendleton is the ultimate corporate boss, and don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more crazy, true-to-life stories about surviving the people who are supposed to love us the most. See you in the next one.